There was a time having a Blackberry phone was the rave. If you didn't own a phone, you just weren't tech-savvy enough. The first Blackberry phone was released in 2002 and quickly became a favorite. Still, the latest models had more rave when 50 Shades of Black was released in 2011, as it was a major component of communication in the book. Also, a fair tip is that the author of the book, E.L. James, confessed to having typed out most of the words of the erotic novel on her Blackberry. However, the story of Blackberry as a company didn't start out just producing smartphones. It begins with the mother company Research in Motion Limited and ends in the era of the new smartphones, to which the Apple company was a big contributor to its end. So, what is the story of Blackberry? Where does the story end? Where is the Blackberry company at the moment? Chapter 1, The Beginning. We must go back to the 1980s in Canada to begin the Blackberry period. Research and Motion, more often known as RIM, was the business that started the first Blackberry in Canada. Mike Lazaridis and Douglas Fregin, two engineering students, began their motion research in 1984. The business began by developing wireless communications network technologies. The first two-way messaging pager is then introduced by Research in Motion in 1996, and by 1997, the business was publicly traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Another pager with a full QWERTY keyboard was one of the first devices to bear the Blackberry name. In fact, the word Blackberry is derived from the look and feel of the company's keyboard. The key advantage of these pagers was their ability to integrate with email, which provided business users and sales representatives with the first convenient on-the-go access to email. This was a big deal, and this is where Blackberry would discover its market. The following model would incorporate telephone capabilities, which at the time had never actually been done properly. However, in the 1990s, Ericsson, IBM, and even Apple strove to dominate the newly formed handheld space palm with the Apple Newton and the stylus. The latter turned out to be a catastrophe because the software was subpar. Blackberry took a totally different approach to study this market. They were going to innovate despite the fact that none of the major players in the 1990s understood how restricted bandwidth was for data transmissions. Research in Motion's founder, Mike, was aware of this restriction in the Blackberry handsets and had developed a tool to divide the bits of data transmissions so as not to overwhelm the networks. As a result, while other companies were asking astronomical prices for products that hardly functioned over a network, Blackberry devices just worked. This, along with a keyboard that could be used to type well while using money, gave Blackberry a distinct advantage. Blackberry's use of guerrilla marketing was another factor in their success. Employees of Blackberry would frequently attend conferences and see business folks using large computers. These individuals would receive a free Blackberry to try out for a month from Blackberry workers. When corporate customers started using Blackberries instead of computers, this tremendous word-of-mouth marketing caused the devices to quickly become a requirement and take over the business world. Simply put, the phone was far more useful than this one. The buzz around Blackberry at the time quickly spread to non-business customers, so Blackberry decided to target them and provide extra functions for the average user. Their entry into this new market was made with the Blackberry Pearl. It included multimedia components like a camera and came with a new service called Blackberry Messenger. Blackberry Messenger used internet data to deliver cheap and speedy communications, much like iMessage and iPhones do now, in the mid-2000s when text messages were the most popular form of messaging. It was absolutely groundbreaking back then. People were able to get out from under their SMS message cap. As a result of this breakthrough, Blackberry quickly spread over the world. At its height, the business controlled 50% of the US market and 20% of the global smartphone market. Its users included both young and old, professionals and non-professionals, making it a Goliath in the tech world. The corporation held a very strong position in the marketplace. What exactly went wrong, then? Chapter 2, Why It All Went Wrong. The year was 2007. The first Transformers movie was released, George W. Bush was in office, and Windows Vista was still relatively new. At Macworld, Steve Jobs took the stage to discuss a new gadget that Apple was working on. The product was an integrated phone, mini-computer, web browser, and email machine all in one device. While Steve Jobs was making his presentation, the founder of Blackberry, Mike Lazaridis, in Canada, said, "This is an impossibility with the networks wouldn't be able to transport this. It's ridiculous that anyone would even propose this." The issue was that Mike was correct that this iPhone release led to lawsuits against Apple for a device that didn't function correctly, but then after the initial setbacks, the iPhone began to work and Mike became very wrong. The iPhone swept the globe during those 2 years. When BlackBerry realized what a significant threat this was, there were already followers, which made the problem worse. Its interactive, multi-touch capacitive touchscreen has caught the imagination of users and developers. Android phones from companies like HTC began to appear on the market, breaking down barriers and escalating competition. BlackBerry had never experienced this before because they didn't have many potent rivals. There were premium mobile phone brands like Sony Ericsson, Nokia, and Motorola, but BlackBerry stood out. Still, everything changed practically immediately. The iPhone performed a number of tasks better than BlackBerry. A better camera, a larger screen, highly interactive touch, and multimedia playback are all features that were top-notch, but it was the browser that really differentiated the two. The iPhone blew its competitor out of the water by allowing more ways to interact with the page. In addition, most interactions with the device just felt more natural. Despite having a much smaller screen to render images and limiting how the layout could be displayed, the BlackBerry wouldn't go down without a fight. Contrary to popular opinion, BlackBerry was still flourishing at this time. They were expanding in Indonesia, India, and other countries. They were a sizable organization that even had to construct new plants to meet the demand. After the iPhone's initial network issue was resolved, BlackBerry replied by making the following phone screen substantially larger while still leaving the QWERTY keyboard that made them famous. BlackBerry's fundamental problem was that it was trying to compete in a market that was changing by updating its physical features while its operating system stayed largely the same. BlackBerry quickly became aware of this and responded by switching from their Java-based OS to a new OS created in the languages Q and X. Unfortunately, because they could reach a larger market by creating apps for Android and Apple rather than Q and X, developers chose to ignore Q and X. In the end, it resulted in a negative feedback loop for BlackBerry. Developers had less customers to sell their apps to since there were fewer third-party apps, which meant fewer consumers wanted to purchase BlackBerry smartphones. Which in turn implied that less software would be created for BlackBerry, continuing the destructive loop. BlackBerry had slipped from being the most popular mobile brand to third in just a year. In yet another effort to salvage BlackBerry, the company updated the operating system yet again, this time switching to Android OS, which, regrettably, showed that BlackBerry was no longer unique from other Android phones and had no competitive advantage in this still evolving industry. Naturally, they made the switch to a software company. Chapter 3, A Turnaround. On the 4th of January this year, BlackBerry ultimately bid goodbye to its smartphone software, rendering users who continued to use an outdated BlackBerry device incapable of successfully sending texts, making calls, or accessing data. Although there are still devices available to buy, some people like a physical keyboard, the BlackBerry as we once knew it is now formally dead. However, BlackBerry the business is still very much alive. The Waterloo-based corporation, which was once the most valued on the Toronto Stock Exchange, has undergone an almost complete makeover into a business that offers operating systems and enterprise security solutions for increasingly connected vehicles. Most observers agree that the company has finally finished its long transition from selling consumer technology to business-focused software, particularly cloud-based solutions. John Chen, who was brought in as CEO in 2013 to take over from founder Mike Lazaridis and former CEO Jim Balsillie, FCPA, FCA, and take the company in a new direction, is now focused on wooing C-suite executives instead of gadget-loving consumers. It's a new business, says Brian Partridge, research director with S&P Global Market Intelligence. A different company with the same name. When Chen joined the corporation, the organization entered a new era. Chen previously turned the struggling data software vendor Sybase into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Compared to the 49 million phones the business supplied just 3 years earlier and the 120 million smartphones that Apple sold in the United States alone that year, BlackBerry shipped 19 million handsets in 2013. At first, Chen planned to save the company's device division. The BlackBerry Classic was introduced in 2014, while employees were still working hard to produce a successful handset. According to BlackBerry's Chief Technology Officer Charles Egan, who first worked there from 2011 to 2015 and then returned 4 years after, we were all trying to build the device that would take off. At the time, Egan was in charge of the software for all devices globally, and he acknowledges that they were absolutely upset that the gadgets were not more successful. Looking back, the failings of the phones were made worse by the fact that many of the innovations they made, including encrypted messaging and phones without home buttons, are now taken for granted. The writing was on the wall, though: get out of the phone sector or bid BlackBerry, which still employed thousands of Canadians, farewell. Sales at the time did not match expectations, and the company was losing money. It lost $5.9 billion in 2014. The business had two important things going for it despite its difficulties. It was well known for being a leader in security, and also a BlackBerry device was very difficult to hack into. As a result, it possessed a monopolistic market share in tightly regulated and data-sensitive sectors including finance and government. In a press release from 2014, Chen said that, "We're going enterprise," after spotting an opportunity. BlackBerry's cybersecurity segment generated $128 million in sales by the third quarter of its fiscal year 2022, somewhat less than the $130 million it generated during the same period the previous year, but still in line with analyst expectations. In contrast to some of its rivals, security is in BlackBerry's DNA, according to Egan, and technologies like mobile threat defense, which employs AI to block malware and stop phishing assaults on workplace mobile devices, are unparalleled in the industry. Although there are certain advantages to this sector, investors can only hope that BlackBerry has learned anything from its earlier experiences of being a first mover. For starters, it's more difficult for businesses to enter this market and compete with BlackBerry. Additionally, unlike phone users, original equipment manufacturers won't switch OS systems. It helps that in December 2020, BlackBerry and Amazon Web Services, AWS, the largest cloud provider in the world, struck a multi-year collaboration to develop IVY, with AWS supplying the cloud infrastructure on which IVY runs. The business might never again enjoy the same level of popularity. Their automotive technology may end up in all of our vehicles, but it will work in the background. But that doesn't mean it can't once more be a popular tech product in Canada. The company is still in its early stages, but now that the change of its product is through, it's time for people to discover what the new BlackBerry is made of. Are they the struggling company that couldn't keep up with changing market dynamics, or the brilliantly innovative operation that started the mobile revolution? You have to respect that they've made this transition, says Partridge. As someone who has been an analyst long enough to not only use BlackBerry but also cover BlackBerry as it ran into the teeth of Android and iOS, to go from what that was to where they are now is impressive. If you want to know more about other big conglomerates like Adidas, Yamaha, Ferrari, watch the next video.